Taslima Nasrin is a Bengali author and physician who has lived in exile since 1994. She is an award-winning writer, physician, secular humanist and human rights activist, is known for her powerful writings on women's oppression and unflinching criticism of religion, despite forced exile and multiple fatwas calling for her death. In India, Bangladesh and abroad, Taslima's fiction, non-fiction, poetry and memoirs have topped the bestsellers list. Taslima Nasrin was born in Bangladesh. She started writing when she was just 13 years old. Her writings won the hearts of people across the border, and she landed with the prestigious literary award Anada from India in 1992. Taslima won the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought from the European Parliament in 1994. She's won so many awards that we'd be here all night if I list them. There's just endless ones there, so I go on. Taslima has written 35 books in Bengali, which includes poetry, essays and novels. Her works have been translated in 30 different languages. Some of her books are banned in Bangladesh. Because of her thoughts and ideas, she has been banned, blacklisted and banished from Bengal, both from Bangladesh and West Bengal, part of India. She has been prevented by the authorities from returning to her country since 1994. So, would you put your hands together and give a warm welcome?
I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the Atheist Ireland for inviting me in Ireland, the country I love for its long freedom struggle. I was born and raised in a rigidly male-dominated society in Bangladesh. This country was recently in the international news because of the collapse of a factory building which killed more than 1,100 poor workers. Hazardous buildings conditions are common in the Bangladeshi garment industry. Although the garment industry creates a $20 billion profit for the Bangladeshi economy, garment workers continue to be paid low wages, $30 to $40 per month. Women make up most of the garment workforce, and more than 80% of the casualties in the factory collapse were women. Despite the overwhelming amount of women in the industry, men are often promoted to higher level positions, while women continue to be exploited with long work hours and low wages in the dangerous working conditions. We all know women are treated as inferior beings in many countries, including Bangladesh. So many years have passed, I still cannot forget about Yasmin, a 15-year-old Bangladeshi girl employed as a maid. She was raped by her master. She fled from the master's home, and she was observed by the police as she walked towards her parents' house. The police told her it was not safe for a girl to be walking on the road at night. They offered her a ride home. Then 6 policemen raped her, killed her, then threw her body into the bushes. When news of her murder broke out, villagers demonstrated against the police. The police shot at the protesters, killing 7. The government then issued a statement the following day that Yasmin was a girl of bad character, she was a prostitute, and the police had every right to treat her as they did. Such is not a rare case in Bangladesh. I know that it happens in other countries also. Reba is a young girl of 19. She's a farmer's daughter. She's pretty. There's a young man in the village who wants to marry her. He's the son of a big farmer, quite a spoiled one. Reba's father did not accept his proposal. One day the young man took revenge by throwing acid on her body. When I heard of the event, I was far away from Reba in a distant land, and she was struggling for life in a hospital. I don't know whether she survived. Rajia Begum did not survive. She took poison and saved herself from the ultimate dishonor. Her fault was adultery. An Islamic pope of her village accused her for carrying a bastard child by her ex-husband, who had already divorced her by saying talaq. Rajia argued that her husband had uttered the word talaq only once and not thrice, as is required to effect a Muslim divorce, and that they had resumed living together. But the mullahs did not accept the argument. They sentenced her to be flogged 101 times. Rajia did not let herself be flogged. She committed suicide. In my country, events like these are very common. The victims of Islamic law are always women. Many women have been sentenced to public lashing and other cruel, inhuman, and degrading forms of punishment. A lot of women are convicted and sentenced by Islamic law court for having premarital and extramarital relationship. Even women are sentenced to public whipping after they are raped. Some women are burned at stake after the Islamists found them guilty of adultery. In one of my poems, I cried for Nur Jahan. Fanatics issued a fatwa against Nur Jahan because her marriage was considered un-Islamic. She was stoned to death. I felt the mullahs were stoning me and torturing me to death. Let me read my poem titled Nur Jahan. They have made Nur Jahan stand in a hole in the courtyard. There she stands, submerged to her waist, with head hanging. They are throwing stones at Nur Jahan. Those stones are striking my body. Stones are striking my head, forehead, chest, and back. They are throwing stones and laughing aloud, laughing and shouting abuse. Nur Jahan's fractured forehead pours out blood, mine also. Nur Jahan's eyes have burst, mine also. Nur Jahan's nose has been smashed, mine also. Through Nur Jahan's torn breast, her heart have been pierced, mine also. Are these stones not striking you? They are laughing aloud, laughing and stroking their beards. There are white caps stuck to their heads. They too are shaking with laughter. They are laughing and swinging their walking sticks. From the quiver of their cruel eyes, arrows speed to pierce her body, my body also. Are these arrows not piercing your body? Bangladesh is an unfortunate country where half the population is deprived of their basic human rights because they are born as girls, and where millions of women have no access to education, nor do they have the possibility of becoming independent. Because of the country's strong patriarchal tradition, women suffer unbearable inequalities and injustices. They suffer from different physical and psychological problems that are not treated. Women normally remain untreated because they are not taken to hospitals until they reach terminal stages. Women are not supposed to become sick because they must remain busy with household chores, bear and rear children, take care of the family, and make sure that the male members of the family are happy. A woman's destiny is to be ruled by the father in childhood, by the husband when she is young, and by her son when she is old. Women's role is to stay at home and to obey her husband. Women are considered weak, so they should be taken care of. Their body and mind, their desire and wishes, their rights and freedom must be controlled by men. Women are treated as inferior beings, childbearing machines, and mere sex objects. Far too many women suffer from sex trafficking, from sexual slavery, and all sorts of discrimination. Women are flogged, they are stoned to death. Men throw acid on women's bodies, burn their faces, smash their noses, melt their eyes, and walk away as happy men. women are raped or accused of allowing the rape, and the rapists are set free. Violence against women is not considered a crime in my country. I was born in a country where married couples want male babies. For them, the most unwanted thing is a female baby. If a female baby is born, it is not uncommon that either the wife gets a divorce for her crime of having given birth to a female, or the wife must spend her life in disgrace. I'm the third child of my parents. Before I was born, my parents had 2 boys, so I was not an unwanted child. But my childhood was not a happy childhood. I grew up in an anti-women tradition and culture. I was not allowed to do many things that I wanted to do just because I was a girl. I could not go outside to play football or cricket like my brothers, or swim in a lake or ride a bicycle. I could not talk to boys who were not my relatives. I had to stay behind the curtains when male guests came to our house. But I was obviously a privileged girl. My father was a doctor and a secular person. He wanted me to study medicine and become a doctor. I witnessed the dropout of school of my female classmates as they were forced to be victims of arranged marriages. I was lucky. My father never forced me to marry anyone before I completed my education and become independent. As I grew up in Bangladesh, I realized that like other religions, Islam is not compatible with human rights, women's rights, freedom of expression, and democracy. In a real democracy, the separation of religion and state cannot be neglected. There is no way we can enjoy human rights if we allow religious rules to regulate society. As I grew up, I became aware of women's human rights. I believe that Islam does not consider a woman to be a separate human being. Man was the original creation, and woman was created secondarily for the pleasure of men. Islam treats women intellectually, morally, and physically as inferior. In marriage, Islam protects the rights of men and men only. The Quran gives total freedom to men, saying, "Your women are as your field, go on to them as you will." Islam considers women psychologically inferior. Women's testimony is not allowed in cases of marriage and divorce. If any woman is raped, she has to produce 4 male witnesses to the court. If she can't, there is no charge against the rapist. In Islamic law, the testimony of 2 women is worth that of 1 man. In the case in which a man suspects his wife of adultery or denies the legitimacy of the offspring, his testimony is worth that of 4 witnesses. A woman does not have the right to charge her husband in a similar manner. Women are not allowed to inherit the property on equal terms with their brothers. In the case of inheritance, Allah says, "A male shall inherit twice as much as a female." And after all the rights and freedom, after obtaining all the sexual pleasure and having the pleasure of being the master, man will be rewarded with wine, food, and 72 virgins in paradise, including the wives they had on earth. And what is the reward for the pious woman? Nothing but the same old husband, the same man who caused her suffering when they were on earth. As I grew up, I kept observing the condition of women in our society. Like millions of women, my mother was an oppressed woman. She had been given into marriage when she was a child. She was a good student in school, but she was not allowed to continue her studies. My grandfather did not want her to study. He wanted her to be a good housewife, a good mother, a good caretaker. Many people still believe torture of women is not oppression, but rather a tradition. In Bangladesh, in the beginning of the 90s, hundreds of thousands of Islamists burned my books publicly and demanded my execution by hanging. Fatwas were issued against me. They set price on my head. Instead of taking action against the Islamists, the government took action against me, filed case against me on the charges of blasphemy. And finally, I was thrown out of my country. My crime was that I said it is dangerous to follow the religious scriptures in this modern world. Not only the Quran, but all the religious scriptures are out of time, out of place, and they are all anti-women. I have been writing about women's rights and freedom, but my freedom of expression has been violated by the authorities. Almost all parts of my memoirs and other books have been banned in my country. My memoirs is not just my life story. It is the same story that thousands of women know about. It tells how women live in a patriarchal society that possesses hundreds of traditions in which girls and women suffer. I have looked back into my childhood days and described the life of being a female child, told how I was brought up, explained that I had privileges that many others didn't have. I was able to study and become a medical doctor, something which thousands of girls cannot even dream about. I wanted to show where and how I grew up and what made me think differently and do things differently. It is important to give other women some strength to revolt against the oppressive system that I grew up under and which still continues to oppress them. I told the truth. I expressed everything that happened in my life. Normally it is taboo to reveal rape or attempted rape by male members of one's family. Girls shut their mouth because they are terribly ashamed. But I did not shut my mouth. I didn't care what people would say to me or to my family. I know well that many women feel that I am telling their untold stories too. We, the victims, should cry out loud. We need to be heard. We must protest loudly and demand our freedom and rights. We must refuse to be shackled, chained, beaten, and threatened. No one taught me to be disobedient. No one helps build courage either. In order to demand rights for women, one doesn't need to internalize Simone de Beauvoir or Gloria Steinem. One's own awareness is often good enough. If I'm hungry, I shall eat. If I'm lashed, I shall wrest away the lash. If I'm oppressed, I shall stand up. These sentiments are universal. Feminism is not a property of the West. It is the arduous struggle by abused, oppressed, tortured, disrespected, ignored women coming together, putting their lives at stake for the sake of their rights. Human rights are universal. Those who talk about separate human rights for the East and seek to distance themselves from the universal human rights, assuming that this stance represents a victory over the prolonged oppression by the West, actually end up harming the East more than the West. Though Islam is the state religion of Bangladesh, the law of the land doesn't allow Islamic courts, nor does it accept the right of anyone to declare fatwa. But the mullahs are holding their courts and issuing their fatwas against women with impunity, and hardly any man gets punished. Bangladesh, like many other countries, is a land of patriarchy, a land dominated by man. The male domination is deep and pervasive, particularly in the social and personal life in Bangladesh. Patriarchy there is reinforced and regulated by various religious decrees. Those who have to suffer most because of these are the women of Bangladesh. Rape, murder, torture for dowry, throwing acid for the sake of love, talaq, flesh trade, trafficking, domestic violence. There is no conceivable offense against women that is not committed in Bangladesh. In the developed countries, women outnumber men. In Bangladesh, it's other way around. True, most people are poor, irrespective of sex, but poverty is not the only one curse for women. They're relatively much more behind than men. Fewer girls go to school than boys. The gap is much wider in higher education. Religious education dominates at the primary level. In higher education, the area of study considered to be suitable for women is quite limited. Girls are taught that their only duty is to be good housewife, to give birth to children and to serve the husband and the family. Even though there is a quota system for women in higher education and work, women are not encouraged to be educated and have economic freedom. Because of the tradition and customs, and because of the religious obstacles, not many women are able to make a professional career. Many companies still refuse to employ women. Bangladesh is one of the nations to have already ratified the United Nations Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but it hasn't accepted some of the major clauses of this convention relating to equal rights on marriage, divorce, child custody, inheritance, etc. Why have they failed to accept some of the clauses because these clauses challenge the Islamic law. A few months ago, Bangladesh had a spectacular secular uprising. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered in an area called Shahbag, despite the threats of the Islamic fundamentalists. The secular movement of Bangladesh was called Shahbag movement. Many people tried to compare Shahbag movement with Egypt's Tahrir Square movement, but Shahbag was not really like Tahrir. Tahrir movement was against a corrupt dictator. Shahbag movement was against Islamic fundamentalists. The Islamists have gained unbelievable strength in Bangladesh since mid-80s. They have been showing off their strength by harassing, abusing, stabbing, and murdering anyone who protests against their atrocities. They stabbed and killed atheist bloggers, the organizers of the secular Shahbag movement. Islamists have also taken to the tactic of calling all the bloggers and protesters at Shahbag atheists. This has scared the young protesters. Most of the protesters consider themselves Muslims, progressive Muslims, but they joined Shahbag movement with no bigger and better agenda than merely to ask for the hanging of war criminals. War criminals are those Islamists who were the collaborators of Pakistani army in 1971 when Bangladesh had a war against Pakistan. War criminals were against the liberation of a secular Bangladesh from Pakistan, the Islamic Republic. War criminals killed and tortured and raped Bengalis during the war. Many secularists at Shahbag movement demanded banning of the Jamaat Islami, the political party of Islamists. Even though I do not support the death penalty of war criminals, as I am against the death penalty, I supported the banning of Jamaat Islami party. And again, even though I support democracy, I am for the banning of Jamaat Islami because Jamaat Islami in Bangladesh is nothing but a terrorist organization. Islamists do not believe in democracy. Their main aim is to bring theocracy and bury democracy and secularism forever. Now, because the Islamists have called moderate or progressive Muslims atheists, many of them are now falling over themselves trying to prove they are pious Muslims. Therefore, instead of saying they are atheists and they have the right to criticize religion, but no one has the right to kill them, just like no one has the right to kill religious people for being religious, the so-called liberal and secular people are saying Jamaat Islami goons are trying to prove that bloggers are atheists, but they are not atheists, they are good people, as if atheists are not good people. It is very alarming that the word atheist is being considered as a filthy, dirty, obscene word in Bangladesh. And the liberal people refrain from doing anything in support of the freedom of expression of atheists. They must know that Islam should not be exempt from the critical scrutiny that applies to other religions. They must understand that Islam has to go through an enlightenment process similar to what other religions have already gone through by questioning the inhuman, unequal, unscientific, and irrational aspect of religion. If the secular movement in Bangladesh cannot make people understand this simple but necessary idea, then real change would never occur, even if all the war criminals are hanged. I'm not a pessimist. I hope that people would soon be enlightened enough to realize that there is no real difference between Islam of the 7th century and the Islam that Islamic terrorist organizations practice today. Sadly, the very nature of Bangladesh has changed greatly over the years. Ordinary people have been alarmingly indoctrinated into the ways of Islamists. Many more women are veiled and more men go to mosques to pray than ever before. I lost the hopes I had for Bangladesh many years ago, but some of those were revived by the recent secular movement. Shahbag movement is temporarily stopped because atheist organizations of the movement were attacked by the Islamists and arrested by the government. I truly hope that the secular movement will begin again and turn into a positive political movement for a true democracy and a secular state, a state which affirms a strict separation between religion and state and maintains an uniform civil code, a set of secular laws that are not based on religion but instead on equality, and an education system that is secular and scientific. State and society must be secularized for women to have the rights and freedom they deserve. Like everywhere in the world, there is war in Bangladesh too. A war between two opposite ideas, secularism and fundamentalism, between rational, logical thinking and irrational, blind faith, between those who strive to move forward and those who strain to push themselves backward. A war between modernism and barbarism, between humanism and Islamism, between innovation and tradition, future and past, between those who value freedom and those who do not. I continue encouraging people of Bangladesh to transmute their country into a secular country without poverty, illiteracy, ignorance, and superstition, free from religionism, fanaticism, fascism, barbarism, a country without crime and corruption. All sane and secular people should support Bangladesh's secular movement because it is a rare and immensely difficult movement in an Islamized country. I'm not sure whether they will eventually manage to have Jamaat Islami proscribed, particularly because the Bangladesh government is likely to be afraid of losing the considerable support that comes from the Middle Eastern Islamic countries. Once a thriving community of vibrant, affectionate, creative people, this unfortunate country is now drowning in Islamism and may soon be submerged in the Indian Ocean. I also hope that if the Shahbag movement in its present form fails to achieve its goals now, the brave and enlightened people associated with it will not be permanently disillusioned or disheartened and will renew their efforts until their dreams come true. People need to get angry. I'm painfully aware of the evil powers which one attempted to eliminate me and with whom the pro-Islamist government ultimately conspired to throw me out of Bangladesh, my own country, 20 years ago, never to allow me in again. Even when my mother was on her deathbed, the Bangladesh government told me I could not return. A few years after that, when my father lay dying, I begged, pleaded, and cried to be allowed to see him, if only for 2 days. The government refused to permit me to enter the country. Therefore, I know how much I would love to see hundreds of thousands of angry, passionate, young people with a vision rise against the insanity of Islamists and to guide to real change in new era. A few weeks ago, 500 million Islamists gathered in the city of Dhaka, where they set fire to shops and vehicles, killed police and ordinary people. Islamists, or the protectors of Islam, demanded the execution of atheists by hanging. The government already arrested them for their crime of being atheists, but Islamists are not happy. Their main agenda is to kill atheists or whoever criticizes Islam. They are desperate to introduce anti-blasphemy law, the death penalty for blasphemy. They have other agendas to make Bangladesh Darul Islam, a land of Islam. We clearly see that Almighty Allah is unable to protect himself and his religion, so the government and some Islamic organizations are working to protect Allah as well as Islam from the atheists. Almost all political parties in Bangladesh support Islam and Islamists. It looks like Muslims are desperate to protect Islam by any means. Islam turns into a handicapped religion which cannot survive without support. An American secularist says, atheism should not be a crime, blasphemy should be celebrated, not outlawed. One of the many problems with the concept of protecting religion from defamation is that ideas, including religious ideas, cannot be defamed. Only people can be defamed. If governments feel that any idea must be shielded from scrutiny, questioning, or even ridicule or satirical commentary, that idea must be extremely weak, or alternatively, the society in question must be repressive. This is why blasphemy should not be criminalized, but celebrated. Those subversive individuals with the bad manners to remind us that no idea is sacred, that governmental defense of any theology necessarily weakens the legitimacy of both the government and the theology, should be thanked for making us think and for reminding us that we live in a free, open society. Non-believers are valuable contributors to society and deserve no inferiority complex complex or stigmatization, yet their government encourages it. Theistic supremacy is too often the official governmental line only because politicians find it easy to pander to religious voters by exalting religious belief. Avijit Ray, moderator of a Bengali freethinker, said, there was a time in the 17th and 18th century in Europe when women who excelled in knowledge, science, and philosophy more than men were blamed for witchcraft and were burned alive by the churches and their theocratic government. Education and thus advancement for women has always been a threat for radicalism, so this is why the church and the government indulged in burning the progressive women by branding them as witches. Exactly the same situation is in Bangladesh right now. The whole new generation who brought in a revolution in Bengali blog community with their advancement in science, philosophy, and critical mind, who wrote against the religious fundamentalism and in favor of our great liberation war, freedom of speech, secularism, and democracy, will be burned alive just like witch hunt in the late Middle Ages. By supporting women's rights everywhere, I have criticized all kinds of anti-human religions, tradition, cultures, and customs. But to my surprise, I'm labeled as being anti-Islam. Thus, has led to some people saying that I am a Muslim hater. But they are wrong. By no means am I a Muslim hater. I always stand beside oppressed people. I stood beside Muslims when they were oppressed in Gujarat, in India, in Palestine, and in Bosnia. I defended their rights to live, just as I stood beside the Hindus who were oppressed in Bangladesh and the Christians in Pakistan. To me, their religious identity is not important. I consider them as human beings. Nobody should be oppressed because of their belief. The criticism I make of the religions I do by writings. I do not go to harm the believers physically. I do not believe in violence. The fanatics never accept the idea to have a dialogue or debate with me or write articles or books opposing me. They come to kill me, for they are convinced by their belief in their religion that an apostate must be killed. Still, people like to believe that Islam is a religion of peace, but since my childhood, I have witnessed the opposite. I believe no country can become civilized without criticizing the dogmatic practices of its religions. Without separating state and religion, no state or society can become modern. We all were excited for Arab Revolution, but should we be happy at the end? And that the corrupt dictators stayed in the power for decades, but did not secularize the countries, rather looted money and exploited people. Dictators will be gone, but Islamists are coming into power. Secularists are too small minority to fight Islamists. My fear is the Islamists will replace democracy with theocracy, introduce Sharia laws, and force women to be covered with the darkness of burqa and stone numerous women to death. Women are deprived of their democratic rights in many countries, especially in Muslim countries. Democracy means nothing if it fails to provide equal rights to women. Ensuring women's rights benefits not only women, but also the men and children in their families and their societies as a whole. It also strengthens democracy, prosperity, enhances stability, and encourages tolerance. Protecting both the human and property rights of women and of all people is at the core of building a civil, law-abiding society, the foundation for true democracy. Empowering women through equal access to education and economic opportunity is essential for the eradication of poverty and enables women to participate effectively in the decision-making process that shape their communities and their lives. Education is increasingly essential if individuals are to succeed in a global and technologically advanced economy. Women's integration into the mainstream of economic life leads not only to significant economic progress for the family, but ultimately for the country as well. The status of women, I think, is one of the single most important indicators to measure the degree of the development of a country. The progress of a nation is generally measured in terms of its economic achievement, but the degree of women emancipation and participation in all walks of national life is as important as any other achievement. All these are dependent on the role and status of women in society. The subordination of women is basic to all social systems based on dominance. For this reason, conservatives hate and fear the voices of women. That is why so many religions have made rules against women preaching or even speaking in the house of worship. That is why governments keep telling women to keep quiet. You are in the constitution, they will say, you have the vote, so you have no right to complain. But having a voice is as important, perhaps more important than having a vote. When censors attack women writers, they do so in order to intimidate all women and keep them from using their right to free expression. Gender-based censorship is therefore a problem not only for women writers, but for everyone concerned with the emancipation of women. I agree with what Meredith Tax says about women writers. Women writers are a threat to systems built on gender hierarchy because they open doors for other women. By expressing the painful contradiction between men and women in their society, by exposing the discrepancy between what society requires of women and what they need to be fulfilled, women writers challenge the status quo, make a breach in the wall of silence. They say things no one has ever said before and say them in print where anyone can read and repeat them. Women writers symbolize in their work and life the free speech of women. That is why they become targets, and that is why the global women's movement and all Democrats must defend them even when what they say or the way they live is controversial. Women have a right to be controversial. You don't have to agree with someone to defend her right to speak. They have a right to be celibate or childless, to get divorced, to be lesbians, or to have many lovers. You don't have to live the way they do to defend their rights. A democracy is defined by its ability to tolerate differences. The problem here is not the strength of conservatives, but the lack of commitment of liberals when it comes to defending the free speech of women. When their own rights are threatened, it's a different story. I became the target because I'm not only an atheist, I'm a feminist. Most liberals shut their mouths when feminists are attacked. The same liberals protest loudly when male writers or artists get harassed, even though the harassment they suffer is much less the harassment I suffer. Women are still considered inferior beings who should stay at home, do chores, rear children, and must not be outspoken. The misogynistic patriarchal media and men call me controversial writer, but they call male writers having much less literary quality than mine superb writers. And when I express my ideas that are different than conventional ideas, they would call me attention whore. And they would definitely call male writers who later express their ideas that are exactly like my ideas, very bold and very courageous writers. I want to read one of my poems translated in English. They said, "Take it easy." Or the title of the poem is, "You Go Girls." They said, "Take it easy." Said, "Come down." Said, "Stop talking." They said, "Shut up." Said, "Sit down." Said, "Bow your head." Said, "Keep on crying. Let the tears roll." What should you do in response? You should stand up now. Should stand right up. Hold your back straight. Hold your head high. You should speak. Speak your mind. Speak it loudly. Scream. You should scream so loud that they must run for cover. They will say, "You are shameless." When you hear that, just laugh. They will say, "You have a loose character." When you hear that, just laugh louder. They will say, "You are rotten." So just laugh even louder. Hearing you laugh, they will shout, you are a whore. When they say that, just put your hands on your hips, stand firm and say, yes, yes, I am a whore. They will be shocked. They will stare in disbelief. They will wait for you to say more, much more. The men amongst them will turn red and sweat. The women amongst them will dream to be a whore like you. Because of my ideals, I became the target of patriarchy and religious orthodoxy. Women are not allowed to speak out in my country. Bangladesh is a place where it is said that the more a woman remains silent, the better she is. Always there is a conspiracy to make women deaf and dumb. I will never accept it. Come what may, I shall speak out from my heart. I will never be silenced. Thank you. Thank you very much.